The street had always been quiet. Not the kind of quiet that felt empty, but the kind that came from routine. People left for work in the morning, came back in the evening, and nodded at each other without much talk. Cars parked where they had always parked. Children walked their bicycles along the curb. Nothing ever changed, and nobody expected it to. The man who lived near the end of the street had been there for years, long enough to know which houses turned their porch lights on early, and which neighbors took their trash out late at night. He never thought much about the road itself. It was just there. A shared space, used by everyone, owned by no one in particular. At least that was how it had always felt. One morning, the feeling changed. He noticed it when he left his house earlier than usual. The sun was barely up, and the street looked different, though he couldn't immediately tell why. Then he saw them. Thick metal posts planted firmly into the ground near the edge of the road. Short, heavy, and impossible to miss. Bollards. They weren't there the night before. He was sure of it. At first he assumed it was a city project. Maybe road safety work. Maybe something temporary. He stood there for a moment, keys in hand, trying to understand why they were placed exactly where they were. They blocked part of the shared driveway area, making it hard for cars to turn smoothly. It didn't make sense as he drove past them carefully. He noticed scrape marks on the ground, fresh cement still drying around the base. This wasn't temporary. Someone had planned this. Throughout the day, the bollards became the only thing anyone talked about. People slowed down to look at them. Some shook their heads. Others took pictures. No official signs were posted. No notices had been given. No one remembered receiving a letter or seeing an announcement. By the evening, the question spread quietly from house to house. Who did this? The answer came sooner than expected. The woman from the corner house began standing outside more often, arms crossed, watching. She didn't say anything at first, but her presence felt deliberate. When someone struggled to park, she watched. When a delivery truck hesitated, she watched. Eventually, someone asked her directly. She didn't hesitate. She said the bollards were necessary. She said people had been misusing the road for years. She said it was finally time to fix the problem. She spoke as if the decision had always belonged to her. The man listened from a short distance away. Something about her tone bothered him. It wasn't concern. It wasn't safety. It was certainty. The kind that leaves no room for discussion. That night, he replayed the scene in his head. The way she stood. The way she spoke. The way she didn't ask anyone for agreement. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. Just bollards. Metal posts. Nothing more. But the next morning proved him wrong. Getting out of the driveway took longer than usual. Cars backed up. Someone honked. Another neighbor had to get out and guide a vehicle around the posts. A delivery driver looked confused and annoyed. Small delays added up. Frustration grew quietly. By afternoon, the woman began correcting people, telling them where they could and couldn't park, saying things like, "That's not allowed anymore, and this area is restricted now." No explanation. No proof, just statements. The man tried to ignore it. He focused on his routine. Work, home, sleep. But the street no longer felt neutral. It felt controlled. A few days later, he decided to speak to her, not angrily, not accusingly, just to understand. He walked over calmly, keeping his voice even. He asked who approved the installation. He asked if there had been any official permission. Her expression changed instantly. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she questioned him, asked why he cared, said he should mind his own business, said rules were rules, whether people liked them or not. When he asked which rules, she told him he didn't need to know. That was the moment something clicked. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about order. It was about control. Over the following week, her behavior became more noticeable. She wrote things down in a small notebook. She stood outside during peak hours. She made phone calls while pointing at cars. People began avoiding her gaze. Conversations stopped when she walked by. The street felt tense. like everyone was holding their breath. One evening, the man noticed a note on his windshield. It warned him about improper parking. It mentioned consequences. There was no logo, no official stamp, just printed words and a tone meant to scare. He looked around, already knowing who it was from. That night, he couldn't sleep. He thought about how quickly something small had changed everything. A few metal posts had turned neighbors into suspects and a shared space into a battleground. He wondered how far this would go. He wondered who would stop it at that point. Nobody knew this was just the beginning. The Bollards were only the first move. The days after the Bollards appeared did not get easier. Instead, the streets slowly began to feel smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in, even though nothing physical had changed. People still used the same road, the same sidewalks. But now they did so carefully, always aware that someone was watching. The woman's presence became constant. She seemed to know everyone's schedule. She was outside in the mornings when people left for work, and again in the evenings when they returned. Sometimes she leaned against her fence. Other times she stood near the Bollards, as if guarding them. Her eyes followed every car, every pause, every turn of the wheel. The man tried to keep his distance. He told himself that reacting would only make things worse. But it was hard to ignore how quickly the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations between neighbors became shorter. People no longer stopped to chat near the driveway. Everyone seemed eager to get inside their homes, doors closing faster than before. One afternoon, he watched a visitor struggle to park. The car moved back and forth, unsure of where to stop. The woman walked over immediately. Her voice carried across the street. She told the driver they were blocking access. She told them they couldn't stay there. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was firm, sharp, and final. The visitor apologized and left without arguing. That moment stayed with him. Not because of what she said, but because of how easily she said it, like she had done it many times before. Soon the notes started appearing again. Slipped under doors, left on windshields, taped to trash bins. Each one warned about parking violations, access rules, or possible reports. None of them mentioned who issued the warning. None of them gave a clear reason. They were vague on purpose, written in a way that made people uneasy. The man received another one late one evening. He stood in his kitchen reading it over and over. The language was cold. It suggested consequences without naming them. It made him feel like he had done something wrong, even though he knew he hadn't. That night, he talked to another neighbor quietly. They stood a few feet apart, voices low. The neighbor admitted they had received similar notes. So had others. Nobody wanted trouble. Nobody wanted to be the first to complain. Everyone hoped it would stop on its own, but it did instead. The woman became bolder. She began stopping people directly, asking where they were going, telling them they couldn't park there anymore. When questioned, she spoke about rules and regulations, but never explained them clearly. She used confident words without details, knowing most people wouldn't push back. The man noticed something else too. She had started carrying her phone differently, holding it up more often, sometimes angled toward the street. It wasn't always clear if she was recording or just pretending to, but the message was obvious. People felt exposed. One morning, as he backed his car out carefully, she stepped closer than necessary. She told him his tires were too close to the Bollards. He asked calmly where he was supposed to go. She shrugged and said it wasn't her problem. That was the moment his patience began to crack. He wasn't angry yet. He was tired. Tired of adjusting. Tired of feeling watched. Tired of being made uncomfortable in a place that had once felt neutral and safe. He began paying closer attention. Writing down dates. Remembering times. Not to fight, but to understand what was really happening. The pattern was clear. Every action she took pushed a little further. Every day she tested how much control she could take without being challenged. One evening, raised voices echoed briefly across the street. Another resident had questioned her about the Bollards. The conversation didn't last long. She shut it down quickly, repeating that everything was legal and approved. When asked by whom, she walked away. That silence spoke louder than any argument. The street felt divided now. Not into sides, but into individuals. Everyone isolated, dealing with the situation alone. Fear of escalation kept people quiet. Nobody wanted to be targeted next. The man stood by his window late one night, looking at the bollards under the streetlight. They looked heavier somehow, more permanent, like a symbol of something larger than metal and concrete. He realized then that the issue was no longer just about access or parking. It was about someone deciding they had the right to control others without consent, and worse, doing it slowly enough that people doubted themselves. This wasn't over, it was building. And everyone could feel it. By now, the street no longer felt like the same place. What had once been ordinary had turned into something heavy and uncomfortable. People still went about their lives, but every movement felt watched, judged, and quietly recorded. The Bollards stood there like silent witnesses, reminding everyone that someone had crossed a line and wasn't stepping back. The woman's behavior changed again. Slowly but clearly. It was no longer just watching or leaving notes. She began acting as if she had official authority. The way she spoke shifted. She stopped explaining herself altogether. Instead, she issued instructions. One morning, a service vehicle stopped near the driveway. The driver stepped out to check an address. Before he could even ring a bell, she approached him. She told him he was not allowed to stop there. She said it was restricted access. Her voice was calm but firm, like someone used to being obeyed. The driver asked who had restricted it. She replied, "It's been reported already," without saying by whom. The driver didn't argue. He got back into his vehicle and left. Several neighbors saw it happen. Nobody said anything. But everyone felt the same thing, a quiet mix of anger and disbelief. The man felt it too. He was standing a little distance away, pretending to check his phone. What bothered him most wasn't that she stopped the vehicle. It was how confidently she did it, without hesitation, without proof. She acted like the street belonged to her. Later that day, she stood near the Bollards again, holding her phone up openly this time. She didn't hide it. Anyone who drove past could see the lens pointed in their direction. Some people slowed down. Others looked away. A few waved nervously, unsure of what she might do with the footage. That evening, the man found another note on his door. This one was longer. It warned about ongoing monitoring and mentioned formal reporting. The language sounded official. But there was still no name, no contact, no authority listed. He felt something change inside him as he read it. Not fear this time. Something else. A realization she was trying to make people feel powerless. The next few days brought more incidents. She confronted someone visiting a neighbor, demanding to know why they were there. She questioned a ride pickup. She told a resident their car was on record. Each time, she avoided details. Each time, she relied on confidence and silence to do the work for her. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. The man was unloading groceries when he heard raised voices. Not shouting, but loud enough to draw attention. He looked up and saw her standing close to him, pointing toward the Bollards. Several neighbors had stopped what they were doing. A small crowd was forming. She was accusing him of ignoring warnings. She said he had been told before. She said she had evidence. Her words came quickly, practiced, like a speech she had rehearsed many times. He stayed calm. He asked her, clearly and politely, to explain which rule he had broken. He asked her to show proof of authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. He just asked simple questions. She didn't answer them. Instead, she repeated herself louder. She told him he was being recorded. She told him officials would hear about this. She wanted the moment to feel serious, embarrassing, public. For a second, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Another neighbor stepped forward. Quietly said they had received the same notes. Another admitted they had been warned too. Someone else mentioned being filmed without permission. The tension shifted. What had been private fear was now shared experience. The woman noticed it instantly. Her expression changed. Her confidence slipped just slightly. She told everyone to back away. She said they were interfering. She claimed she was acting within her rights. The man realized then that she wasn't prepared for people to speak together. Her power depended on isolation. Later that same day, she made several phone calls. People saw her pacing, talking loudly, pointing at houses. Within the hour, an official vehicle arrived. Not dramatic, not urgent, just routine. The street went silent. An officer spoke with her first. She talked quickly, gesturing toward the Bollards, toward the man, toward the driveway. The officer listened, nodded, then spoke with the man. Asked questions. Calm questions. The man answered honestly. He explained the sudden appearance of the Bollards, the notes, the filming, the confrontations. Other neighbors stepped forward one by one. Confirming parts of the story, the officer walked over to inspect the Bollards, looked around, checked something on a device, asked a few more questions. Then came the moment everyone would remember. The officer said there was no record of approved installation. The woman protested immediately. She said there must be a mistake. She said paperwork existed. She said it was in process. The officer asked her to provide it. She couldn't. The officer explained calmly that unauthorized installations could not remain. He said the matter would be reviewed. He said there would be follow-up. No one cheered. No one celebrated. But something shifted again. The air felt lighter. Not resolved, but exposed. After the officer left, the woman didn't say anything. She went inside her house and closed the door. The Bollards stayed for now, but their meaning had changed. That night, the man sat quietly, thinking about everything that had happened. He realized how close everyone had come to accepting something that was never right to begin with. How his confidence could be mistaken for authority. How silence could look like agreement. He also knew something. Else, this wasn't finished. She hadn't backed down. She had been challenged, and people like her didn't let go easily. The street was about to learn just how far she was willing to go. The days after the officer's visit felt strange. Nothing had been officially resolved, yet everything felt different. The Bollards were still there, standing exactly where they had been placed, but they no longer carried the same weight. People looked at them now with a quiet confidence instead of fear. They had been questioned. Their legitimacy had been challenged. And that alone changed the balance. The woman, however, did not disappear. She stayed inside for a day, maybe two. Her curtains remained closed. Her door did not open. The street noticed the silence immediately. It was tempting to believe that this was the end of it, that she had finally realized she had gone too far. But that hope did not last. On the third day, she came back outside, and when she did, she was different. Not calmer, not quieter, sharper, more defensive. Like someone who felt wronged instead of corrected. She began pacing near the Bollards again, phone in hand. But now, she wasn't just watching. She was talking loudly, making sure people could hear her. She spoke about being targeted, about being treated unfairly, about how people were turning against her. Her words weren't directed at anyone in particular, but they landed anyway. The man noticed that she no longer avoided eye contact. In fact, she held it longer than necessary, as if daring someone to challenge her again. He stayed cautious. He didn't approach her. He didn't respond. He knew better now. What mattered was not reaction, but record. Other neighbors felt the same way. They spoke quietly among themselves. They compared experiences. They shared dates and details. Patterns became clearer with every conversation. What once felt isolated now looked organized, intentional. One afternoon, city crew arrived. They didn't come suddenly or loudly. Just a small truck and a few workers with tools. People stepped outside slowly, curious but careful. The woman rushed out immediately, blocking their path. She raised her voice. She demanded explanations. The crew leader listened calmly. He explained that the Bollards were being reviewed due to multiple complaints and lack of authorization. He said they were there to inspect and potentially remove them. That word remove changed everything. The woman's composure cracked. She accused the crew of trespassing. She accused neighbors of lying. She said this was harassment. Her voice rose higher with every sentence. People watched from their porches, hearts pounding, unsure of what would happen next. The man stood quietly, hands in his pockets. He felt the tension in his chest, but he didn't move. This wasn't his fight alone anymore. The crew did not argue. They followed procedure. They took photos. They made notes. They explained again that no permit existed, that the installation was unauthorized. That removal was lawful. When they finally began the process, the sound of tools against metal echoed through the street. It felt symbolic. The bollards that had caused so much tension were now being undone, piece by piece. The woman shouted. She threatened legal action. She claimed everyone would regret this. But her words didn't stop the work. By sunset, the bollards were gone. The street looked open again, wider, familiar, but peace did not return immediately that night. The woman made more phone calls. She paced her yard long after dark. Lights flicked on and off inside her house. Her frustration spilled into the open. She felt exposed, defeated, and people like her did not accept that quietly. The next few days brought a new kind of escalation, instead of physical barriers. She used paperwork, complaints, accusations. Neighbors began receiving notices about noise, parking, property boundaries. Some were legitimate. Many were not. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. The man received one too. It claimed he had violated a regulation he had never heard of. He read it carefully, then set it aside. He no longer felt panic. He felt tired. But he also felt ready. He contacted the city office directly. Calmly, clearly, he asked questions. He provided documentation. Photos, dates, statements. Others did the same slowly. The truth came together. Officials began to see the full picture. Not just one complaint, but many. Not just one neighbor, but a pattern of behavior. The woman's reports were reviewed closely now. Her credibility weakened with every inconsistency. When she realized this, her anger turned inward. She isolated herself again. Her presence outside became rare. The street breathed easier, but cautiously. One evening, the man walked down the street for the first time in weeks without feeling watched. The air felt lighter. Children played again. Cars parked normally. Conversations returned, but he knew something important. This wasn't just about bollards. It was about how easily power could be taken when people stayed silent. How quickly normal life could be disrupted by one person's need for control. And how important it was that someone finally said, "This isn't right." The situation wasn't fully over yet. There were still reviews, still decisions to be made. But the direction had changed. The escalation had reached its limit, and accountability had finally entered the conversation. The street would never forget how close it came to losing its sense of shared space. But it would also remember how it got it back by standing together, quietly, firmly, and without becoming what they were fighting against. The street did not return to normal all at once. It happened slowly, in small moments that only made sense when looked at together. A car parked without hesitation. Someone waved instead of looking away. A short conversation lasted longer than a polite nod. These small things meant more than they seemed. The woman stayed quiet for a while after the bollards were removed. Her house remained closed up, curtains drawn most of the day. When she did come outside, she kept to herself. No notes appeared. No warnings were issued. No phone held up like a shield, for the first time in weeks. The street felt calm. The man noticed how different his mornings felt. He no longer planned his route out of the driveway. He no longer scanned the sidewalk for signs of confrontation. He simply left, like he used to. The tension that had lived in his chest for so long finally began to loosen. But calm did not mean nothing was happening. Behind the scenes, the situation was being reviewed carefully. Officials had received enough information now to understand what had really taken place. It was no longer one person's word against another. It was a clear record of repeated behavior. Unauthorized changes, false authority, harassment disguised as concern. Letters were sent. Meetings were scheduled. The process was slow, but it was moving. The woman was informed that her actions had crossed boundaries. She was told clearly that she had no authority over shared spaces. She was instructed to stop contacting neighbors and to direct any future concerns through proper channels only. She did not take this well for a brief moment. It seemed like she might push back again. Her voice was heard one afternoon, raised in frustration during a phone call. She spoke about being misunderstood, about being singled out, about how nobody appreciated what she had tried to do. But something was different this time. No one reacted. There were no arguments, no shouting, no gathering crowd. People simply went on with their day. Doors closed gently. Conversations continued elsewhere. Her words faded into the background unanswered. That silence did what arguments never could. Days passed. Then weeks. The complaints stopped completely. The woman still lived there. She still walked the street occasionally, but she no longer watched everyone else. She no longer tried to control what she did not own. Whatever consequences she faced had finally reached her in a way that mattered. The street settled into a new version of itself. Not exactly the same as before, but wiser. More aware, the man often thought about how close everything had come to going very wrong. How easy it would have been for fear to win. How simple it would have been to stay quiet, to accept inconvenience as normal. To believe that confidence meant authority, he realized that the most dangerous part of the situation had not been the Bollards. It had been the doubt. The moment people questioned their own right to shared space, the moment they wondered if standing up was worth the trouble. What saved them wasn't anger. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't revenge. It was patience. It was paying attention. It was people quietly comparing notes and realizing they weren't alone. One evening, neighbors gathered outside for the first time in months, not to discuss problems, just to talk. Someone brought chairs. Someone laughed. The streetlights came on as the sky darkened, and nobody rushed inside. The man sat there, listening, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. He understood now that communities weren't defined by how perfect they were, but by how they responded when things went wrong. By whether people chose fear or fairness, silence or clarity. The Bollards were long gone, but the lesson remained. Sometimes trouble doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as rules, wrapped in confidence. Placed carefully so people don't notice until it's already there. And sometimes, the strongest response isn't force, but calm resistance. The street moved forward. Life continued. And what began with metal posts ended with something stronger than before shared. Understanding that no one person gets to decide how others live, not without consent, not without truth, and not without consequence. Life did not suddenly become perfect after everything settled, but it became steady. That steadiness mattered more than anyone realized at first. The street found a rhythm again, one that felt earned rather than assumed. People moved through their days without checking over their shoulders. The simple act of parking a car or stepping outside no longer came with a quiet calculation. The man noticed the change in small ways. Mornings were easier. He left the house without thinking about angles or distances. Evenings felt longer, not because time had changed, but because stress no longer shortened them. He started taking short walks again, something he had stopped without fully noticing. The street felt open, not just physically, but emotionally. The woman remained part of the street, but she was no longer its center. She came and went like everyone else. When she passed others, there were brief nods or nothing at all. No tension followed her steps. No fear traveled with her presence. Whatever hold she once believed she had was gone. From time to time, the man caught himself replaying moments from those months. The notes, the watching, the way silence had once felt like agreement. He realized how easy it had been to doubt himself, even when he knew something was wrong. That awareness stayed with him, not as bitterness, but as clarity. One afternoon, a new family moved into a nearby house. A moving truck parked near the driveway without issue. Neighbors helped guide it in. Someone offered water. Someone else pointed out where to place boxes. The moment passed without conflict, and that alone felt meaningful. Later, as the truck drove away, the man noticed how normal it all looked. And that normalcy felt like a quiet victory. The street had learned something it could not unlearn. It had learned that shared spaces only work when people protect them together. That authority should never be assumed without proof. That confidence is not the same as permission. These lessons didn't turn into speeches or meetings. They lived in behavior, in how people spoke up sooner, in how they checked facts, in how they listened when someone said, "This doesn't feel right." The man found himself doing the same beyond the street. At work, in conversations, in moments where silence once felt safer. He wasn't louder. He was clearer, more willing to ask simple questions and wait for honest answers. Sometimes, late in the evening, he sat outside and watched the streetlights come on. The road looked just like it had before any of this began. Empty, ordinary, but he knew better now. He knew how fragile that feeling could be if left. Unguarded. He also knew how strong it could become when people stood together without turning cruel or loud. The experience left no heroes and no villains. In the way stories often do, it left people, flawed, cautious, learning. The woman did not disappear, and she did not transform overnight. She simply lost the ability to control others. That was enough. Time moved forward. Seasons changed. The street aged a little, like everything does, and yet it held on to something valuable. A shared memory of how easily power can slip into the wrong hands, and how quietly it can be taken back. When people choose patience over fear, what began with metal posts ended with something far less visible. But far more important, awareness, and that awareness stayed. Long after everything else faded into routine again, time passed in a quiet, steady way, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Weeks turned into months, and the street continued to live its life without drama. What once felt like a place under pressure now felt ordinary again, but not careless. There was a new awareness beneath the calm, like a memory everyone carried even when they didn't talk about it. The man noticed how people interacted differently now. When something felt off, it was mentioned sooner. When confusion appeared, questions followed instead of silence. Nobody rushed to conclusions, but nobody ignored discomfort either. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, practical, and grounded. He sometimes wondered if the woman noticed the change too. She still lived there. She still walked the same sidewalk. But she no longer shaped the energy of the street. She blended into it instead of bending it. When she spoke, her words didn't carry the same weight they once had. People listened politely, but they didn't freeze. They didn't retreat. That shift mattered more than any official decision ever could. One afternoon, the man saw her struggling with something simple. A heavy package sat near her door, left by a delivery driver. She stood there for a moment, looking at it, unsure how to move it alone. In the past, nobody would have approached. Fear and resentment would have kept people distant. This time, someone stepped forward. No words were exchanged at first. Just a simple offer of help. The package was lifted, placed inside, and the door closed quietly. No gratitude was demanded. No apology was expected. The moment passed like any other neighborly interaction. The man watched from across the street, surprised by how much that small act meant to him. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. It was balance. Life continued. Holidays came and went. Weather changed. New routines formed. The street aged another year, like everything does. Cracks in the pavement grew slowly. Trees dropped leaves and grew them back again. Ordinary things filled the days, but every now and then, something would remind the man of how close everything had come to going wrong. a random notice on a door, a stranger acting overly confident, a rule mentioned without explanation. In those moments, he felt a quiet alertness rise, not panic, it's just awareness. He understood now that problems didn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes they arrived politely, wrapped in certainty. Asking for nothing while taking everything, the biggest lesson stayed with him in a simple form. Shared spaces only stay shared when people protect them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, the man took a slow walk down the road. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A car passed at an easy pace. A dog barked once and then went quiet. Everything felt normal. And that normal feeling, he realized, was not automatic. It was built, maintained, defended quietly by people who cared enough to notice when something wasn't right. The street did not become perfect. No place ever does. But it became honest. And sometimes that is more than enough. The street no longer felt like a place that reacted. It felt like a place that understood itself. That change did not happen suddenly, and it did not come from one big moment. It came from everything that had already happened, settling into memory and shaping how people moved forward. The man felt it most clearly on quiet mornings. He would step outside and pause for a moment, not because he was afraid, but because he liked the stillness. The road stretched out the same way it always had. No barriers, no tension. Just space, shared space. He thought about how strange it was that something so ordinary could feel so valuable. People passed by more. Not because they had nowhere to go, but because they no longer felt rushed by pressure. Conversations happened naturally again. Someone would stop to ask about a package. Someone else would comment on the weather. These small exchanges stitched the street back together in ways no meeting or rule ever could. Every once in a while, the man noticed the woman watching from a distance. Not in the old way. Not with control or suspicion. Just observation. Like someone trying to understand a place they no longer directed. She seemed quieter now. Smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. He didn't feel satisfaction from that. He felt understanding. Power, he had learned, does not disappear icily. It fades when it is no longer fed. The street had stopped feeding it. One afternoon, a misunderstanding happened. A car parked slightly awkwardly near the edge of the road. In the past, that would have caused tension. Notes, warnings, accusations. This time, someone simply mentioned it kindly. The driver adjusted. That was it. The man noticed how naturally it happened. No fear, no authority, just communication. He realized then that the real change wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of trust. Trust that if something was wrong, it could be discussed. Trust that no one had hidden power over others. Trust that silence was no longer required to keep the peace. That trust didn't make people reckless. It made them responsible. As weeks passed, the story of the Bollards faded into the background. Newer residents heard fragments of it. Longtime neighbors remembered it clearly, but nobody needed to repeat it constantly. Its lessons were already built into behavior. The man sometimes wondered what would have happened if he had stayed quiet. If everyone had? If the Bollards had remained, followed by more rules, more control, more pressure. He didn't dwell on it, but he didn't forget it either. One evening, he sat outside as the light faded. The street looked peaceful in a way that felt earned. He listened to the ordinary sounds of life and felt something settle inside him. This was what shared space was. Supposed to feel like not controlled, not claimed, just lived in. The experience had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. He was more patient now, more attentive, less willing to accept vague authority, not just on the street but everywhere. He asked questions calmly. He listened carefully. He trusted his instincts when something felt off, and most importantly, he trusted others to feel the same. The street had become a quiet reminder that fairness does not need force. It needs awareness, consistency, and the courage to speak before silence becomes surrender. Nothing dramatic happened after that, and that more than anything, felt like success by the time another year passed. The story of the Bollards felt like something that belonged to a different version of the street. Not forgotten, but settled. Like a scar that no longer hurt but still reminded you of what had happened. The man noticed how new routines had quietly replaced old habits. People were more open now, but also more aware. They didn't assume things would always be fine just because they looked fine. They paid attention. Not in a suspicious way, but in a grounded one. Small disagreements still happened. They always do when people live close together. A noise complaint. A parking confusion. A delivery blocking a driveway for a few minutes too long. But these moments no longer turned into tension. They turned into conversations. The difference was simple. People spoke before frustration had time to grow. One afternoon, a temporary sign appeared near the road, placed by the city for planned maintenance. It was official, clearly marked and dated. Still, a few people paused when they saw it. Old habits resurfaced for a moment. Questions followed quickly, but calmly. Someone checked the notice online. Another called the city office. Within minutes, everything was clear. The sign stayed. The work happened. The sign came down, no fear, no confusion. The man watched it all unfold and felt something like quiet pride. Not in himself, but in the way the street had learned to handle uncertainty. The woman remained distant but peaceful. She kept to her routines, went about her days, and no longer tried to shape anyone else's. She spoke less, and when she did, it was ordinary. About weather, about deliveries, about nothing important. The man did not feel the need to revisit the past with her. There was no closure conversation, no apology exchanged. Some things do not end neatly, and that was okay. What mattered was how the story ended for the street. People trusted themselves now. They trusted each other enough to speak. They trusted process over pressure. And most of all, they trusted that shared space belonged to everyone, not just the loudest voice. The man carried that lesson with him wherever he went. He noticed it at work, when someone spoke with too much certainty and too little clarity. He noticed it in public spaces, where rules were mentioned without explanation. He noticed it in himself, when he hesitated to question something that felt wrong. Each time, he remembered how small the first sign had been. A few metal posts, nothing dramatic, just enough to test how much people would accept and how much they would tolerate. One evening, as the sun set and the street settled into its familiar quiet, the man walked slowly down the road. The pavement was clear, cars were parked normally. The air felt calm. He stopped for a moment and looked around. This place had taught him something important without ever trying to. That peace is not passive. It is maintained by people who notice when lines are crossed, who speak calmly, who stay human even when tested. https://wordcounter.net/# The street moved forward. It's carrying its story quietly, like most real places do. And that quiet strength stayed with everyone who lived there. The street reached a point where nothing needed to be said anymore. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything important had already been understood. Life moved forward the way it usually does, quietly and without announcements. The man often thought about how stories like this rarely end with a clear final moment. There was no single day where everything officially became normal again. Normal slowly returned, blending into routine until it no longer stood out. That was how real life worked. He noticed that people no longer reacted strongly to small changes. A visitor parked a little awkwardly, and someone simply adjusted their own car. A loud afternoon passed and no notes appeared, no warnings followed. Trust filled the gaps where fear once lived. The street felt lived in again, not managed. One evening, as the sky darkened and the air cooled, the man sat outside longer than usual. Streetlights came on one by one. A few houses glowed warmly from inside. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. It was an ordinary sound, but it carried comfort. He thought back to the first morning he saw the Bollards, how strange they had looked, how small the problem had seemed at first, how easily it could have been ignored. If everyone had looked away, if everyone had stayed silent, the street might have slowly become something else. It's more restricted, more divided, it's less human. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, people chose attention over avoidance, calm over conflict. They didn't rush to fight, but they also didn't accept what felt wrong. That balance mattered more than anything. The woman remained part of the street's story, but no longer its focus. She lived her life quietly now, like everyone else. No one watched her closely. No one spoke about her behind closed doors. She was simply there, and that, in its own way, was resolution. The man understood something important as time went on. Not every conflict needs a dramatic ending. Not every wrong needs punishment to feel resolved. Sometimes, the most meaningful outcome is the return of balance. The street had regained its balance. New memories replaced old ones. Small celebrations, shared concerns. Ordinary days that passed without incident. These moments stacked on top of each other until the past felt distant, even though it was never erased. Every now and then, someone new would ask about the street, about parking, about access, about how things worked there. The answers were simple. We talk, we ask, we don't assume. That was enough. The man carried that simplicity with him. He noticed how often people complicated things by staying quiet when they should speak, or by speaking loudly when calm would do. He had learned that clarity didn't require force. It required patience and consistency as the years moved forward. The story of the Bollards became something people remembered without emotion. Just a lesson, a reminder. Proof that even ordinary places can face moments that test them, and proof that those moments don't have to leave scars. One night, as the street rested under the steady glow of lights, the man stood at his door and looked out one last time before going inside. Everything was exactly where it should be. No barriers, no tension. Just space shared by people who understood its value, and that was how the story knew. Not with noise, not with victory, but with understanding.